Oh no, she said it. She said the R word. Oh no.
Better get going, kiddo. We're gonna be late.
Alex Forrest.
Nice to meet you. They have mine.
Dan Callagher is a successful, happily married New York attorney living in Manhattan. His wife is named Beth, and their daughter Ellen. We see the couple getting ready for a party at a Japanese place. After leaving Ellen with the babysitter, they head to the party. While at the bar getting champagne, Dan encounters an alluring woman named Alex Forrest, who has recently taken on a role as an editor at a publishing company where Dan has been practicing law. As their conversation unfolds, Dan departs when Beth calls for him. The following morning, Beth and Ellen are going out of town for the weekend. Dan bids them farewell before attending a meeting concerning a case at the publishing house. Alex arrives, and the meeting commences. During the meeting, Alex and Dan frequently exchange glances. After the meeting, they wait for a taxi in the pouring rain, positioned at separate spots.
Hello.
Dan's umbrella fails to open. Alex observes this and offers him her umbrella. Unable to find an empty taxi, Dan suggests they grab coffee instead. As they enjoy their hot drinks, their conversation deepens. Eventually, Dan has a passionate affair with Alex. Though he thought it was understood to be a simple fling, she begins clinging to him. Dan quietly returns home early in the morning. He calls his wife, inquiring about Ellen and assuring her that everything is fine. Beth mentions they had a lovely weekend and that Ellen wants a rabbit. Dan asks her not to promise their daughter anything. Beth says she will return the next day since she hasn't seen the inside of the house. They are considering purchasing. After hanging up, Dan's phone rings. It's Alex, upset about him leaving without notice. Dan explains that he had to return home and left a romantic note by the bedside. Despite his various excuses, Alex insists on inviting him to lunch together. When Alex promises to behave, he reluctantly agrees to the invitation. They have lunch while listening to opera. Dan shares a childhood memory about the first opera he attended. Alex questions why all intriguing men are married. Dan suggests that perhaps their inaccessibility makes them appealing and praises his wife and child.
So what are you doing here?
Dan is taken aback and says she knows how to ask the wrong thing. Alex expresses that they had a fantastic time the previous night and wants to see Dan again, just wanting to know where he stands. Dan, being married, says this may not be feasible, and Alex interprets this as her own misfortune. Then they sleep together again. When Dan wakes up, he immediately starts getting dressed, claiming he's running late. Alex, frustrated with him leaving like that every time, tries to stop him in anger. Dan tells her he hasn't hidden the fact that he's married, and they entered this relationship with full awareness. He urges her to be sensible. Alex retorts that if he'd tell her to fuck off, she would have more respect for him.
All right, then fuck off.
Angered, Alex kicks him and yells for him to get out. As Dan is about to leave, Alex reappears, wanting to say goodbye like friends, and apologizing for making him angry through tears. Dan reassures her there's no need to cry, but as they share a final kiss, he notices that Alex has cut her wrists, prompting him to panic and try to assist her. Unable to leave her in that condition, he tightly wraps her wounds with a shirt. Later, Dan calls his wife using Alex's phone, pretending to be at his own home, completing their routine conversation. Reluctantly, he stays with Alex that night, and in the morning, he expresses that he must leave. Alex promises to go to the hospital, and feeling more at ease, Dan gives her a gentle kiss and departs. Upon getting home, he messes up his bed as if he had spent the whole night there and feeds his meal to his dog to avoid arousing Beth's suspicions. Later, Dan returns home from work, finally reunited with his wife and daughter.
Oh my God, I missed you.
They catch up and the cheerful family scene continues. Beth expresses her fondness for the suburban house. The next morning, they visit the house together. Dan also finds it appealing, and the couple is drawn to the idea of saving more money by not living in New York anymore, so they decide to buy it. When Dan heads to the office at noon, he is taken aback to find Alex waiting for him. He invites her into his office, and she apologizes for the previous night's events, expressing gratitude for not abandoning her as a lot of guys would have just run away.
May I ask you one more favor?
She reveals that she has 2 tickets for the opera Madame a Butterfly 2 weeks from Thursday, suggesting they attend together. Dan politely declines, and Alex, seemingly unaffected, bids him farewell for the last time. However, that evening, Alex appears distraught and emotionally broken, while Dan enjoys the night with his wife and closest friends, in high spirits. The next day at the office, Dan discovers that Alex has called him multiple times. Overwhelmed, he reluctantly answers the last call, clearly stating he doesn't want to meet again. Alex appears to accept this with understanding. That evening, Dan praises his beautiful wife and is about to get closer to her when the doorbell rings. An unfortunate interruption. Their close friends arrive, and they spend another lively night together. Meanwhile, the phone rings persistently. Beth answers but receives no reply. Dan realizes it's Alex calling and becomes tense. The phone rings again later while they sleep.
Yeah, Richards. It's kind of late, isn't it?
Alex is calling, and Dan pretends to be talking to a client. Alex, in a pressuring tone, insists on meeting at noon. Thinking it might be their last conversation, Dan reluctantly agrees to meet to resolve things. They meet, and Dan emphasizes his happy marriage, urging Alex not to interfere. Alex confesses that she doesn't want to cause harm, and admits she is in love with him. When Dan insists it was merely a one-night stand and nothing more, Alex reveals that she is pregnant and they will have a baby. This revelation shocks Dan, especially the fact that Alex wasn't using birth control. She explains that she had a very bad miscarriage the previous year and didn't think she could get pregnant. He begins to speak more calmly and offers to cover the costs for an abortion. However, Alex, being 36 years old and viewing this as perhaps her last opportunity to have a child, is determined to carry the pregnancy to term. She hopes that Dan might want to be involved in the process. The following day, Alex leaves her apartment, and shortly after, Dan secretly enters the house. He rummages through some documents, hoping to uncover evidence that she might be involved with someone else. However, he comes up empty-handed. Subsequently, he confides in his closest friend about the challenging situation he's facing. Lacking knowledge of family law, he hopes his friend can help him. Dan is terrified at the prospect of losing his family. Alex continues to persistently call Dan's home phone. Upon discovering from the operator that the number has been changed, she stresses that it's an emergency, but they refuse to provide the new one, saying it's not allowed to give out that information. The next day, Dan is preoccupied. Upon returning from work, he is in for a significant surprise. Alex, having learned that Dan is relocating, engages in conversation with Beth as if she intends to purchase their house. Beth introduces Alex to her husband. Alex then mentions that they had met previously at a party in a Japanese place. Dan feigns not to recall, and using work as an excuse leaves the conversation. Alex expresses genuine interest in the house, and upon hearing this, Beth provides her with a new phone number to facilitate communication. Dan can only observe. In the evening, Dan goes to confront Alex. She greets him happily and remains quite composed. Dan yells at her, calling her pathetic. Alex asserts that she doesn't need pity, refuses to be used and discarded like a prostitute, and demands respect as the mother of his child. She attempts to get closer to him. As Dan is about to exit the house, Alex threatens to disclose everything to his wife. This infuriates Dan.
You tell my wife, I'll kill you.
Alex immediately calls Beth, furious, but still says nothing. The next day, Dan hastens the moving process. The phone at his new house rings incessantly, causing Dan great stress as the likelihood of Alex calling is high. Fortunately, it turns out to be his assistant, which brings him relief. The following day, Dan is in high spirits because he has finally acquired the bunny his daughter has been wanting for a long time and intends to present her with the gift as soon as possible. However, this joyful moment turns into a nightmare when he discovers that his car has been rendered inoperable with some chemicals. Dan realizes that Alex is behind this. He calls his wife and explains that the car was completely damaged due to the electrical system. Later, he purchases a new car and sets out for home, with Alex continuing to secretly follow him. Eventually, Dan arrives home, and the priceless joy on his daughter's face when he gives her the gift is undeniable. The only person disturbed by this perfect moment is Alex. The next day, Dan visits the police station and, as if representing a client, requests a warning for Alex. The lieutenant explains that without evidence, they can't do anything based on mere suspicion, but they can intervene during the act. A few days later, after spending some time at Grandma's, they return home, and Ellen rushes to her bunny. However, a horrifying truth awaits the family. Beth enters the kitchen and notices something boiling on the stove. She opens the lid and screams, revealing that it's Ellen's bunny. After this, Dan tells Beth of the affair and Alex's pregnancy. Enraged, she asks him to leave. Before he goes, he calls Alex to tell her that Beth knows about the affair. Beth gets on the phone and warns her that if she persists, she will kill her. Without Dan and Beth's knowledge, Alex picks up Ellen from school and takes her to an amusement park, buying her ice cream as well as taking her on a roller coaster. Beth panics when she realizes that she does not know where Ellen is. Beth drives around searching and rear-ends a car stopped at an intersection and is slightly injured and hospitalized. Dan rushes to the hospital, filled with concern. Fortunately, learning that his wife is not in serious condition somewhat reassures him. In retaliation, Dan barges into Alex's apartment and attacks her, choking her short of strangling her. He stops himself, but as he does, she lunges at him with a kitchen knife. He overpowers her, but puts the knife down and leaves, with Alex standing there smiling. He approaches the police about having her arrested, but the police still say they lack cause to take action against her. Following her release from the hospital, Beth forgives Dan, and they return home. Beth prepares a bath for herself, and Dan heads over to the kitchen to make his wife a cup of tea. Alex suddenly appears in the bathroom, again with the kitchen knife. She starts to explain her resentment of Beth, nervously fidgeting and slightly cutting her own leg with the knife, and then attacks Beth. Alex and Beth struggle, and Dan can't hear the commotion because of the kettle whistling. Eventually, Dan hears the screaming. He quickly runs in, wrestles Alex into the bathtub, and seemingly drowns her. She suddenly emerges from the water, swinging the knife. Beth, who went searching for Dan's gun, shoots her in the chest, killing her. The final scene shows police cars outside the house. As Dan finishes talking with the cops, he walks inside where Beth is waiting for him. They embrace and proceed upstairs as the camera focuses on a picture of Dan, Beth, and Ellen. Did this story spook you out? Let us know in the comments below. For more horror movie recaps, subscribe to our channel and we will see you in the next one. Fear awaits you.